I signed every page he put in front of me. $900 million, half of everything my father built. My husband watched me do it. 8 years of marriage, and he took it apart in an afternoon. He said my family treated him like furniture, said I was cold. Maybe we were. But when his lawyer said congratulations, when he buttoned his jacket and smiled through me like I was already gone, I understood what this had been. I let him walk toward that door with everything he thought he'd won.
I let him walk.
Everyone will have a word for what happened next. I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm asking you to hear this before you decide what I am.
8 weeks before that conference room, before the papers, before the pen, I was still wearing his ring. It was a Thursday. I remember because Thursdays were when the groundskeeper came and I could hear the hedge trimmers from the study. My father's study. Walnut desk he'd had since before I was born, oil portrait above it, Raymond Lorraway looking down at whoever sat in his chair, which by then was only me. My mother's watch was in the top drawer, the way it always was, leather strap worn soft at the one buckle hole I ever used. Corwin walked in wearing his coat. You don't wear your coat in your own house, not unless you've already decided you're leaving. He placed a folder on the desk between us, on my father's desk, the desk of the man who built everything Corwin was about to try to carve in half. Then the speech. Ellery, he said, and my name in his mouth sounded like the first line of something he'd memorized. I think we've been growing apart. I need to figure out who I am outside of this. Outside of this, he meant my family, my name, the portfolio, the 32 rooms, everything except me. The pauses were even. Corwin's real pauses are ragged. I'd listened to them for 8 years. These were rehearsed, smoothed flat, the delivery of a man who'd practiced in a mirror until the words stopped hurting him to say. He expected tears or rage. I saw it in the way he planted his feet, tucked his chin, braced for impact. I picked up the folder, read the cover page, set it back down. Is this what you want? 5 words. Not because I was strong, because everything else, every question, every accusation, every 8 years of why was so heavy it couldn't reach my mouth. He said yes. I nodded. He waited for the collapse, for something he could push against. I gave him a nod and nothing else. After his car was gone, I opened the folder again. One line on the second page caught me. Marital Contribution to Portfolio Management, 2017 to 2025. 8 years of marriage. He'd turned it into a billing entry. The estate has 32 rooms. I counted them once as a girl, racing through with my mother, both of us breathless. That Thursday night, I felt every one of them. 32 rooms in a house that was suddenly entirely mine, empty of everyone but me. You'd think that would be the hard part, a man walking out with his coat on and his car running and a speech he'd memorized. It wasn't. The hard part was how quiet the house got after. Here's what I didn't know that night. While I sat at my father's desk listening to rain, my husband was already at war. He'd rented an apartment, 42nd floor, Midtown. I found out later from the credit card statements. Floor-to-ceiling windows, designer furniture that came with the 12-month lease. 2 whiskey glasses on the bar cart, one clean, one not. Nobody visited. That apartment told you everything about Corwin Edler if you knew how to look. Every surface polished, every object leased. A man building a kingdom out of borrowed things. which, when I think about it now, was exactly what he'd been doing for 8 years. He'd hired Paxton Holt, top-tier divorce attorney, the kind whose name shows up in the journal when someone important is getting taken apart. Paxton reviewed our entire portfolio, every fund, every holding, every property my father built and I expanded. And he concluded what any shark would conclude. 8 years of marriage plus documented financial involvement equals half. $1.8 billion was the Lorraway portfolio. Corwin wanted $900 million of it. I'll give him this. He had numbers. He'd restructured our emerging markets allocation, brought in 3 funds that doubled returns, sat in meetings I should have attended, signed memos I should have read. But here's the thing about Corwin's wound, and I need you to hear this because it matters later. His words, "Her father looked through me at our own wedding. 8 years, Paxton. Every Thanksgiving I sat at the end of the table like a guest." He wasn't wrong. The Lorraways are not warm people. My father could make a man feel invisible without ever raising his voice. It was a talent. Corwin sat at our holiday dinners, and the conversation moved around him like water around a rock. He endured it. I saw it. And I didn't fix it. Hold that. Because what he did with that pain, that's where it stops being sympathetic and starts being a weapon. Paxton told him to manage the social narrative. He was already ahead of it. Dinners with our mutual friends, coffees, quiet conversations that weren't quiet at all, just auditions for sympathy. He'd taken the private version of our marriage and turned it into a story with a hero and a villain. And I wasn't the hero. I didn't know any of this. I was at my father's desk, listening to Rain, thinking my husband had simply fallen out of love with me. 3 weeks later, I met Paxton Holt for the first time. Mediation room, neutral firm, beige walls, water pitchers, a conference table nobody had ever sat at twice by choice. And across from me, Corwin, in a suit I'd never seen before, charcoal, sharp, new for the occasion, the way his coat had been new for leaving me. He'd brought Paxton, I'd brought a junior associate from a firm you've never heard of. Young, nervous, she kept tapping her pen against her legal pad like she was counting down to something she didn't want to arrive. Paxton opened a binder, 3 inches thick. He'd organized 8 years of Corwin's financial involvement into tabs. Restructured funds, deal memos with Corwin's name in the signature block, quarterly performance reports he'd submitted to me for approval, documentation I'd signed without reading closely enough. He signed it. I approved it. That was our marriage in 3-ring binder form. Mr. Edler seeks equitable distribution of approximately $900 million in marital assets. Paxton said it the way you'd read a lunch order. 900 million, like it was a number that fit in his mouth. My attorney objected, weakly, something about the characterization of premarital holdings. Paxton cut through it like it wasn't there. Procedural motion, procedural dismissal. Footnote, next. I pressed my hand against my temple. Not because I had a headache, though I did, because it's what a woman does when she's overwhelmed and can't think of what else to do with her hands. And I watched. That's what I want you to understand about that first session. I wasn't participating, I was watching. Corwin across the table, Paxton beside him, my junior associate drowning next to me, and I watched it the way you watch weather move across a field. Something big was happening. Something was being taken apart, and I sat there. When it ended, an hour, maybe 90 minutes, I don't remember, we filed into the corridor. Neutral carpet, neutral lighting, and Corwin caught me by the elevator. He looked at me, not the way he'd looked in the mediation room, through me, past me, toward the assets. This was direct. His eyes found mine and held. For 1 second, maybe less, his brow softened, his mouth opened without sound. I recognized it from the man I'd married. Regret. Actual regret. Then it passed. His jaw set. That blue went cold the way it does when he's made a calculation. You could make this easier, Ellery, for both of us. I said nothing. He walked away. His shoes on the corridor tile, sharp, measured, rehearsed. In the elevator, alone, I checked my phone. A text from Georgia Reed, our mutual friend, or his, as it turned out. Her words were careful, the way lies wrapped in sympathy always are. Corwin told me about the divorce. I'm so sorry, Elle. He says the family was impossible. I had no idea. I stared at the message. 4 sentences from a woman who'd sat at my dining table, drunk my wine, complimented my taste in art, and now was retelling my marriage from his script. I didn't respond. The elevator doors opened. Lobby, marble floors, big windows, the kind of building where marriages go to be divided into columns. And I stood there with George's message on my screen and $900 million on the table and a junior associate who couldn't keep up and a husband who'd looked at me with real regret for exactly 1 second before deciding I wasn't worth the inconvenience of keeping. Somewhere between the elevator and the street, I stopped being surprised.
The next 3 weeks taught me what it sounds like when someone dismantles your family with a binder and a schedule. Session 2. Paxton laid out the real estate holdings. The Greenwich property, not the main house, but the secondary residence my father bought in 1998 as a retreat. 3.2 acres. Corwin's argument? Marital home, jointly maintained, significant emotional investment. My attorney objected. Paxton cited case law from memory. My attorney wrote something in her notepad. Conceded. Session 3. The venture fund positions. 4 funds Corwin had restructured, and he had restructured them, I'll give him that. Performance reports with his name on every page. Quarterly returns he could recite the way most people recite birthdays. Conceded. Session 4. The art collection. 23 pieces my mother had curated over 2 decades. Corwin had never once stood in front of any of them for more than a minute, but they were acquired during the marriage, and acquisition is acquisition. Conceded. And through each session, this is what I want you to notice. Corwin changed. Not dramatically, he just settled. First session, he'd leaned forward, elbows on the table, watching me for any crack. By the 4th, he leaned back, crossed his ankle over his knee, stopped looking at me entirely. When he spoke, he addressed Paxton. I wasn't a person across the table anymore. I was a formality between him and the assets. He'd won, and he knew it before the paperwork confirmed it. Then came the dinner. Charlotte Ainsworth, our mutual friend, or so I'd thought, she hosted a Thursday evening in her brownstone in the village. Small table, 8 guests. Corwin wasn't there. He didn't need to be. I wore a midnight blue silk gown. Not because I wanted to look beautiful, because armor comes in different fabrics, and that night I needed mine. They seated me at the far end. Charlotte was warm, careful, the kind of warmth that comes with preamble. "We're so glad you could come, Ellery." Like attendance was an act of bravery rather than a standing invitation for 6 years. The conversation moved around me the way it used to move around Corwin at Thanksgiving. I sat there and thought, so this is what it feels like. Someone mentioned Corwin, casually, between the second course and the wine. He's doing remarkably well, considering. Considering what? Considering he engineered this?
Then Charlotte leaned in, her hand on my wrist, her voice low enough to sound confidential and loud enough for the table to hear. "You know we love you, Ellery, but we had no idea how isolated he felt." I set down my fork, smiled, excused myself before dessert. In the car home, I turned my wedding ring. Just once, a reflex. And I caught myself doing it, which was worse than the doing, because I wasn't turning it from habit. I was measuring how much longer I'd have to wear it.
You want to know when it really started? Not the divorce, the seeing. 9 months before that signing, before Corwin filed, before Paxton, before I knew what I was capable of. A Thursday night, late, 2, maybe 3 in the morning, that hour when the house stops pretending to be asleep and just admits it's empty. Corwin was traveling, or sleeping in the guest wing. By that point, the distinction had stopped mattering. I went to the study, my father's desk, the habit of a woman who inherited her insomnia along with everything else. I was looking for a restaurant confirmation on Corwin's laptop. We had a dinner the following week, one of those obligation meals with people who evaluate you between courses. His laptop was on the desk, open, password saved, because why would you lock your computer from a wife you'd already stopped seeing? I wasn't snooping, I want to be clear about that. Not because it matters legally, it doesn't, but because it matters to me. I wasn't looking for evidence, I was looking for a reservation at a French restaurant on 63rd. What I found was a folder. No label on the desktop, just a blue icon among dozens. I clicked it the way you click anything, without thinking. And inside, emails. Months of correspondence with a divorce attorney. Not Paxton, someone Corwin had consulted first and apparently discarded. Strategy memos, fee agreements, timeline projections, and a spreadsheet. Marital Asset Distribution, Projected. That was the title. My name at the top, Ellery Lorraway. Printed like a heading on an invoice. Every holding, every fund, every property, 2 columns, current value and projected settlement. My entire family's legacy reduced to a grid he could sort alphabetically. I sat back in my father's chair. I didn't cry. I didn't throw the laptop. I read the entire spreadsheet, every line, every projected dollar. He'd even included the art collection, 23 pieces with estimated auction values sourced from Christie's. He'd been planning this for months before I found it. Months of sitting across from me at dinner, sleeping in the same house, attending the same functions, while modeling exactly how much of my family he could take with him when he left. I closed the laptop, opened the dress drawer. My mother's watch was there, leather strap curled in on itself. I picked it up, held it against my palm, felt it tick. And I sat there, at my father's desk, in my father's house, holding my mother's watch, and my breathing slowed. Not anger, not grief, something colder, something that had a plan before I could even name it. I put the watch back, closed the drawer. The woman who opened that laptop was married. The woman who closed it, she was something else. I just didn't know what yet. Weeks later, in one of those mediation rooms, I sat across from Corwin while Paxton cited numbers I'd already memorized from a spreadsheet I was never supposed to find. My face didn't move. My hands were flat on the table. You know why. 2 weeks before the signing, final negotiation session. Same beige room, same water pitchers, same junior associate beside me with her nervous pen, same Paxton across the table with his Mont Blanc and his binder and his conviction that he was the most dangerous person in the room. He was wrong about that, but I needed him to stay wrong a little longer. Paxton presented the consolidated settlement. $900 million. He'd organized it by asset class: real estate, equities, venture positions, the art collection, liquid reserves. Every line item Corwin had spent 4 years positioning himself to claim.
presented on bonded paper like the packaging mattered. My attorney began an objection, something about premarital asset classification, a technicality she'd been rehearsing all week, her voice climbing the way it did when she knew she was overmatched. I put my hand on her arm. She stopped. The room went quiet. Not silence, quiet. The difference is that silence happens on its own. Quiet is when everyone in a room holds their breath at the same time because someone just did something unexpected. I spoke for the first time in 3 weeks of negotiations. Schedule the signing. 3 words, no conditions, no counter, no appeal for more time, more discovery, more anything. $900 million, and I said yes the way you'd confirm a lunch reservation. Paxton's face, I will remember this for the rest of my life. He was pleased, of course he was, but underneath the pleasure, something flickered. Professional instinct, the part of him that had spent 20 years reading opposing counsel and knew in his bones that a $900 million concession without a single counter demand was wrong, not legally wrong, atmospherically wrong, the kind of wrong that should have made him ask one more question. He didn't ask it. And Corwin, my husband, looked at me across that table, and for one heartbeat, maybe 2, his eyes narrowed. Not triumph, recognition, the look of a man whose instinct is screaming while his desire to win is shouting louder. Would you have caught that look? Would you have listened to it? He didn't. He nodded. Friday, then. I stood, collected my bag, touched the watch on my wrist, my mother's, the one I'd started wearing after that night at the desk. The leather was warm from my skin. I left the room before anyone else. The door closed behind me with a soft click, the same sound it would make on signing day. I just didn't know that yet. Here's the part that's going to make you uncomfortable. 2 days before the signing, Corwin opened the good scotch. I know this because Paxton's firm billed him for 6 hours that evening at $1,200 an hour, and Corwin later tried to submit the whiskey as a case expense. Even his celebration had an invoice. I grew up watching my father do exactly the same thing. Generosity at this altitude is just accounting with a better label. His apartment, 42nd floor, both whiskey glasses used for the first time, Paxton in one chair, Corwin across from him, the midtown skyline performing its nightly audition through the floor-to-ceiling glass. Paxton was relaxed. I'd never seen him relaxed before. In every mediation, he'd been a machine. But that night, jacket off, sleeves pushed to the elbow, Mont Blanc in his breast pocket instead of his hand. Cleanest high-value divorce I've ever handled. She didn't even countersue. He said it with admiration, not for me, for the simplicity, the absence of complication, the efficiency of a victory that required no courtroom, no trial, no public record of contested claims, $900 million and not a single subpoena. Corwin nodded, swirled his glass, and said the thing I need you to hear. I just wanted what I was owed. He believed it. That's what makes it unbearable. He sat in an apartment full of furniture he'd leased, drinking scotch he'd bill someone for, looking at a city he had no claim to, and he believed with absolute sincerity that $900 million of the Lorraway portfolio was what he was owed. He wasn't evil. I've thought about this more than I should. Evil is easy. Evil you can hate cleanly. Corwin wasn't evil. He was a man who married into a family that made him feel small, spent 8 years absorbing the insult, and convinced himself that the money was the same thing as the respect. Take the assets, take back the dignity. It doesn't work that way, but he didn't know that yet. Then he called a friend, speakerphone, Paxton still in the room, still drinking. The friend's voice filled the apartment. Everyone saw it coming, man. She was never going to change. The family would never let you in. Corwin smiled, not his conference room smirk, a real smile, the smile of a man being told he was right by someone he trusted. The social narrative was complete. Wronged husband, cold heiress, impossible family. He wasn't just winning the money, he was winning the story. Now, I need to show you something and I need you to hold it without explanation. 7 months before the signing, night, a Wednesday, I remember because I canceled a board dinner to make it. My car pulled up to a building on the Upper East Side, old stone, brass numbers, the kind of address that doesn't advertise. I walked into a wood-paneled office, small, warm, brass desk lamp throwing amber light across a Persian rug worn threadbare from years of deliberate pacing. An oil portrait on the wall, a man I'd known my whole life, looking down from the frame the way he looked down from the head of every table. Behind the desk, an older man, silver hair combed back in a part that hadn't moved in 40 years, dark eyes, hands folded on the desk, still the way only patient men are still. He slid a folder across the desk toward me. I opened it, read, nodded once. We shook hands. I left. That's all I'm going to give you, for now. Back in the present, 48 hours before the signing, Corwin stood at his windows, scotch in hand, city below him. He looked down at Manhattan the way a man looks at something he's about to own. He didn't know that what he was looking at had already been emptied.
Friday. I stood in the dressing room at 5:45 in the morning and chose what I would wear to end my marriage. Charcoal wool sheath dress, structured shoulders, knee length. The kind of garment that holds its shape whether you do or not. Black pumps, low heel, because vanity is the first thing you abandon when the day requires precision. No earrings, no necklace, no rings. The wedding band was already in my coat pocket. I'd taken it off the night before, standing at the bathroom sink, turning the tap, sliding the gold over my knuckle while the water ran. I didn't throw it, didn't leave it on the counter like a statement. I put it in the coat I'd be wearing the next morning, kept it close, not because I wanted it near me, because I wanted to know exactly where it was when I didn't need it anymore. Last thing, my mother's watch. I fastened it to my wrist, leather strap, simple face, the buckle hole worn soft from her wrist before mine. She'd worn it every day for 20 years. I'd been wearing it for 9 months, since the night I found the spreadsheet. I looked at myself in the mirror. The woman looking back was precise, composed, unrecognizable. 8 years ago, I'd stood in a different mirror, white dress, my mother's pearls, my father's eyes watching from the front row, and I'd believed every word of what I was about to promise. That woman would not recognize this one. I'm not sure this one would want her to. Now, I need to show you something, one more time, the last piece. Don't look away. 6 months before the signing, a Wednesday afternoon, a room I'd been to once before, small, warm, wood-paneled, the same brass desk lamp, the same worn Persian rug, the same oil portrait watching from the wall, the same man across the desk. Between us, a single document, heavy stock, legal watermark. I read every page, every clause, every condition that would make what I was about to do irreversible. I picked up a pen, signed once. He countersigned as witness, slid the document into a leather folio, latched it. No words, no ceremony, just ink on paper and a nod between two people who understood exactly what they'd done. I left that office carrying nothing. The document stayed with him, in a folio, in a briefcase for 6 months. Remember the briefcase. I drove to Midtown, Friday traffic, rain threatening but holding. I parked in the garage beneath Kemble and Associates, the firm name on the building that I hadn't told Corwin I recognized. Conference room, 12th floor, polished walnut table, floor-to-ceiling windows, the room where transactions happen, mergers, dissolutions, destructions, all treated equally by the light. Corwin and Paxton were already seated.
Corwin in midnight navy, his victory suit, Paxton in charcoal with a red pocket square. They looked like men arriving at an awards ceremony where they'd already read the envelope. I sat, my junior associate beside me, legal pad ready, pen nervous, and beside my chair, a new face. An older gentleman, navy three-piece suit, every button fastened, silver white hair combed back, deep brown eyes under heavy lids, a leather briefcase placed on the floor beside his chair. He sat the way furniture sits, present, silent, taking up space without demanding attention. Mr. Kemble, family counsel. Paxton glanced at him once. The assessment took 2 seconds. Old, quiet, ornamental. A courtesy seat for a family retainer. Paxton's eyes moved back to his documents. Dismissed. Niles Kemble, my father's attorney for 30 years, folded his hands on the table and said nothing. The briefcase sat on the floor, closed, patient. Paxton opened the settlement. He walked through the asset division the way a conductor walks through a symphony, measured, practiced, each line item delivered with the precision of a man who has done this 100 times and enjoys the 100th as much as the first. Real estate, equities, venture positions, the art collection, liquid reserves, each one a piece of the empire my father spent 40 years building from a $2 million fund. $900 million, organized by category, presented on bonded paper. The signing began. I signed each page without reading. I'd read them all. Every clause, every subclause, every legally binding concession that would transfer a dynasty into a man's briefcase. Corwin signed with relish, his Mont Blanc moving across each page like he was endorsing a championship. Initials, dates, full signatures. He pressed hard. You could hear the nib against the paper, the sound of a man making ownership permanent. Page after page, the scratch of 2 pens filling a room where 5 people breathed and nobody spoke. 40 pages, every one a piece of my family, every one conceded. When the last page was signed, Paxton collected the documents, squared the edges against the table, turned to Corwin, extended his hand across the polished walnut. "Congratulations, Mr. Edler." They shook. Corwin gripped with his full hand, the handshake of a man who'd rehearsed this moment in his bathroom mirror, in his rented apartment, in the narrative he'd built about himself for 8 years. He finally owned something. Then he stood. He buttoned his jacket, single button, one hand, the gesture I'd seen 1,000 times, before meetings, before dinners, before walking into any room where he needed the world to see him as the man in charge. He turned to me, and he said, I'm going to tell you exactly what he said because you need to hear it the way I heard it, sitting at that table with his pen still warm and my family's legacy in his documents. You know, Ellery, your father spent his whole life building something he thought mattered, and your family spent mine making sure I knew I'd never be part of it. He adjusted his cufflink. Turns out you were right. I was never part of it. I was just the one smart enough to take what I was owed on the way out. I didn't move. I didn't respond. Not because I was wounded, though I was, because the man who said those words had just confirmed something I'd suspected for 9 months and proven in 3 mediation sessions. The marriage I'd mourned was a transaction he'd been closing. His phone vibrated on the table. He picked it up, read, and smiled, wider than any expression I'd seen in 8 years of marriage. Another friend, another congratulations, the social narrative and the legal narrative arriving at the same destination at the same time. He slid the phone into his jacket pocket, reached for his briefcase, snapped the latch shut, a single decisive sound, turned toward the door, and I sat there, hands flat on the walnut, Mother's watch ticking against my wrist, the same posture I'd held for 3 months of negotiations, 6 months of planning, 9 months of knowing. Next to me, Niles Kimball, the man Paxton dismissed in 2 seconds, the man who'd sat through 90 minutes of settlement proceedings without opening his mouth or his briefcase, folded his hands on the table. Corwin was 2 steps from the door. I could have let him go. I want you to know that. I could have let him walk through that door and discover it on his own, in a week, a month, whenever. His new lawyers tried to execute the transfer and found the vault empty. But I'd sat across from that man for 8 years. I'd cooked beside him, slept beside him, worn his ring, believed his promises. He wasn't going to learn the truth from a paralegal. He was going to learn it from the man my father trusted with everything.
Niles spoke. 5 words. Quiet. Delivered the way a man sets down a glass he has no intention of picking back up. His voice carried 30 years of precision. "Before you go, Mr. Edler." Corwin stopped, 2 steps from the door. He turned, not alarmed, annoyed. This old man who hadn't earned a sentence in this room, what could he possibly need to say? Niles reached down. The leather briefcase, the one that had sat on the floor all morning, closed, patient as the man who carried it, came up to the table. 2 latches, left, then right, same order, always. He opened it, removed a single document, 1 page, heavy stock, legal watermark, and he slid it across the walnut table toward Corwin. 1 page crossing 3 feet of conference table. That's all it was. Paper on wood. It undid everything. Niles's voice was measured, clinical, unhurried. 6 months ago, Ms. Lorraway transferred the core holdings of the Lorraway investment portfolio, approximately $1.4 billion, into an irrevocable trust. The trust is structured to be permanently exempt from marital asset division under any jurisdiction. He removed his reading glasses, held them by one earpiece. What remains in the marital estate, approximately $40 million in non-trust holdings, constitutes the entirety of what this settlement awards. He set the glasses on the table. You've been negotiating for an empty shell, Mr. Edler. Silence, the kind that has mass. You feel it settle on your shoulders. And in that silence, everything I'd shown you without explanation replayed itself. The laptop, 9 months ago, the spreadsheet with my name at the top, that's when I knew. The office on the Upper East Side, the man behind the desk beneath the portrait, Niles Kimball, my father's attorney, 7 months ago, that's when we built it. The document I signed in that warm, quiet room 6 months ago, the irrevocable trust, the weapon that emptied the vault before Corwin ever knew there was a war. My weak attorney, deliberate. If I'd hired a real firm, Paxton would have audited the asset structure, would have found the trust. I needed him to see a woman who couldn't fight, so he'd never look for a woman who already had. Every concession, meaningless. Real estate that was no longer mine to give. Art that had been transferred. Fund positions that existed in a different legal universe. My silence, not weakness, not shock, patience. Corwin's face. I watched it the way I'd watched everything for 9 months. Confusion came first, his mind trying to parse what he'd just heard. Then calculation, searching for the angle, the argument, the precedent that could undo this. Then comprehension. Then, and this is the part I'll carry, devastation. The slow understanding that he hadn't lost a negotiation, he'd never been in one. He looked at the document, looked at Niles, looked at me. I hadn't moved. Same hands on the table, same position I'd held when he mocked my family 30 seconds ago. His phone buzzed in his pocket, another congratulation from another friend. He couldn't answer it.
Paxton, top of his field, never lost a case this size, opened his mouth, closed it, because the law was ambiguous, because he'd been outplayed by a woman he never bothered to study. Corwin looked at me one final time, searching for remorse, for triumphs, for anything. I gave him nothing. He left. No door slam, no speech. He walked out carrying $40 million and the knowledge that everything he'd built, the strategy, the social campaign, the story of the wronged husband, was a performance inside a trap he never saw. Paxton gathered his files without looking up, followed his client out. Same sound. Every ending in this story closes the same way. Niles returned the trust document to its folio, slid it into the briefcase, latched it, left, then right. He stood, looked at me, not as a client, as the daughter of the man whose portrait watched from every important wall in both our lives. His voice was careful, almost gentle. Your father would have been proud. Raymond Lorraway, $2 million fund, 40 years. The conviction that patience was the only weapon worth carrying. He would have admired the strategy, the timing, the misdirection. 6 months of silence while the trap closed around a man who never heard it shutting. Whether he'd have been proud of who his daughter became to execute it, Niles didn't ask. He already knew. He left. I was alone. Conference room, floor-to-ceiling windows, midtown skyline, afternoon light, flat, clinical, indifferent to what had just happened in this room. The signed divorce papers sat on one side of the table, 40 pages. His victory, worth nothing now. I reached into my coat pocket, took out the wedding ring. Gold, simple, 8 years on my finger. Removed last night at a sink while the water ran. I set it on the walnut, centered, between where the settlement sat and where the trust document had briefly rested. 2 instruments of dissolution, and between them, a circle that meant everything once. The Lorraway empire was intact, $1.4 billion protected, my father's work, my grandfather's foundation, safe. Corwin would walk away with $40 million and a story about himself that would never survive in any room where the truth had been. Every dinner, every whispered confidence, every friend who told him he was right, rewritten in an afternoon. I won. And I sat in an empty conference room wearing a dead woman's watch, looking at a ring that meant everything once, and I understood, clearly, without any part of me still hoping I was wrong, that the marriage I'd mourned for 9 months had never existed. The woman who loved Corwin Edler died at a walnut desk reading a spreadsheet at 3 a.m. Everything since has been her afterlife, functional, strategic, victorious, empty. Did I protect my family's legacy, or did I punish the man who made me believe love was real? I don't know, and I'm not sure the difference matters anymore. I drove home in the dark. Same stone gates, same gravel, same headlights sweeping across the facade, and for 1 second I saw the house the way a stranger would. Enormous, beautiful, built to outlast the people inside it. It was. The study was waiting, my father's desk, the portrait above it, the brass lamp throwing the same amber circle it had thrown for 40 years. I sat in his chair, the chair where I'd read a spreadsheet at 3 a.m, where I'd received divorce papers on a Tuesday, where I'd held my mother's watch against my palm and decided to become someone I wouldn't have recognized 12 months ago. I unfastened the watch, leather strap, worn soft at the buckle hole she used and I inherited, opened the drawer, placed it inside, next to the space where a wedding ring used to live. 2 objects, one returned home, one left behind on a conference table in Midtown. My father looked down from the portrait. He built this, a $2 million fund, and a belief that patience was the only weapon that never runs out. He was right. I proved it. And I proved something else, that his daughter could sit across from a man she loved, watch him plan to rob her, wait 9 months to close a trap, and never let her hands shake once. I told you at the beginning, everyone would have a word for what happened. Justice, revenge, protection, cruelty. They'll pick the one that makes them comfortable and carry it like an answer. But here's what none of those words touch. I loved him. Not the version he performed, the version I believed in, the man who fell asleep reading on the couch in the next room, who kissed the top of my head in our kitchen, who might have meant some of it for at least some of those 8 years. That man never existed. Or he did, and he died the same night I found the spreadsheet. We lost each other at the same desk, 9 months apart. Neither of us said goodbye. The house settled around me. Rain on leaded glass, clock in the hallway, the sound of a place that will outlast everyone who tries to own it. I built a fortress, and I locked myself inside.
This is American Billionaire Tales, where fortune meets fate. She won everything, except the one thing she went looking for. You've heard her side. If you've got a verdict, or if you're honest enough to admit you don't, the comments are open. Like this video, subscribe, and share it with whoever would have told her to warn him. Next time, a woman is arrested for signing documents she never touched. When the security footage played back, the woman in the chair wasn't her.